Well, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening, George. How are you, mate?
Hello.
Hi, Nala. How are you, mate? Good? All right, yeah, I got an ear flick, so that was all good. How are you, man? How are you? What's going on? Anything exciting happening in the world today?
No, nothing.
Nothing. And thanks for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow night at 10 o'clock. Sorry,
Not in my world, anyway.
I just had a incident tonight. I'm a little bit underprepared for the show tonight, not in a massive way, but we've talked a few times on the show about cell phone technology, addictive issues and that kind of stuff. And I have to say, I have my middle child, 16 years old, no longer as of tonight has a smartphone. So that smartphone has gone from that child because the addictive tendencies that I was seeing, speaking from experience, who understands personally a bit about addiction, has become unmanageable for the 16-year-old. So parents have had to step in and take it. And tonight there was a combination where social media is a problem, and there's been restrictions put on social media, and more restrictions put on social media. And because these bloody kids these days, George, they're bloody smart, these bloody kids, always finds out a way around it. Tonight, finally, the 16-year-old got the 13-year-old involved by using the 13-year-old's iPod, which the 13-year-old uses to listen to Audible and stuff and Spotify, and then got on social media via her siblings' iPod. And so we had a sit-down chat tonight. And for those of you guys who don't understand addiction, if you look at all the things that happen within them, one of the big things is your actions are now impacting the people around you significantly. So everyone's lost their technology tonight, and the 16-year-old now has officially a dumb phone. The smartphone has gone away. There is a dumb phone with pushy buttons, AAA, ABC, DEF, GHI, as you go through the thing. Because if I look at it this way, if it was alcohol, I would do everything I could to remove the alcohol from the premises. It's a phone. What's the difference? Same tendencies, same addictive behaviors, same downstream effects, other than being drunk, but, detrimental impacts. So, yes, so my evening was one of a little bit of tension around the house and one of a little bit of grumpiness by some. But hopefully, in the long run, it'll be the right decision. We shall see. So there's my lovely evening, George. My lovely, lovely evening. And other than that,
imagine it's a constant battle, though, right? 16-year-olds.
Yeah. But I also think that, and one of the things I've always fought back is parents still can be parents. Like I'm not the kind of parent who's gone, all the 10-year-olds have phones, so let's get the 10-year-old a phone. Like my 13-year-old doesn't have a phone. She will get a phone of some level next year when she enters secondary school. But the reality is she's probably going to get the dumb phone that my current 16-year-old has in their bedroom. So that's how my 13-year-old will start like that. Next year doesn't have a phone right now. We call it the whānau phone. I think I've talked about this before, whereas I've got a secondary phone, a Samsung. And if the 13-year-old goes to a sleepover or has to go out, or if I have to go somewhere, and like the 13-year-old's recovering from a tonsillectomy at the moment, then she can have the whānau phone, because then I can call her, she can call me. So she's got access. She just doesn't own. So yes, I struggle when I hear parents talking about their 10-year-old or 11-year-old's got a $1,500 iPhone or something because all the other kids do. It's like you can still be the parent. And even though I feel like I failed a little bit with this smartphone and the 16-year-old because obviously she couldn't handle it, at the end, which is now, I'm still the parent and I can still make the decision, which I've done. I should be careful, which I've done in consultation with her mother. We've done, but I've physically done it. So yeah.
Yeah, I like it. Good policy with the phone on a sleepover and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just, like, I remember way back in the 90s, George, when you were in undies probably, or nappies or something. When I was at teachers training college,
Growing out of my undies.
I had a friend, when you're in your Superman undies, I had a friend who lived in Tauranga, and she used to drive between Tauranga and Auckland for teacher training college. And at one stage she got a phone, and, because that was when everyone was starting to get access to them. And she was like, oh, I've really got the phone in case there's a problem on the road between Auckland and Tauranga when I'm driving home. And I was just like, what did you do a month ago? Because a month ago you drove that road and you didn't need one. So I'm still in that camp that people think all this technology is essential these days. It's not essential. It's desirable, and it certainly helps in life, and it makes some things easier. But there's also a cost with it. It's not essential, and I think we've come to the decision that the 13-year-old next year will start with a dumb phone. It's almost like when you start writing, George. You probably don't remember this, but when kids start writing in primary school, they get like a learner. They have to get their pen license. A lot of them, they get a pencil, and the pencil's got like this triangular rubber that the pencil slides through like that. And the triangular rubber is so that they can put their fingers in the right position. It's what it's designed for. And then they get their pen license, and then they're allowed to use a pen, and that's how it works. So why would we do any different with something that is potentially as addictive as a phone? So my 13-year-old will have to get her phone license by using a dumb phone starting next year. Yeah, and I'm going to stand by
it. The technology comes along and sort of reconfigures what we think of as essential. Those sort of definitions all change, don't they?
Yeah. And look, I remember, and I've said this to my kids and other kids before, I think there's a lost art of the ability to be bored. It's like, the example I always use, I was at St. Peter's College in central Auckland, and I'd finish cricket practice at 5:15, or even if I was playing on a Saturday or a Sunday and the buses were more like an hour apart, and I'd have to go wait in the bus stop. And if I didn't have a book, I was just literally sitting there doing nothing, which blows kids' brains today. Or if I had a book to read or whatever. But there's a real art in being able to sit and chill without being entertained. And, not to sound like a boomer and say this generation, but it's an art that's being lost. And I think it's harmful. If people can't be bored, it's like being bored is where you get to sit and think and imagine and picture and, come up with ideas. If you're constantly being fed other people's imagination through this, then when do you do your own? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And 10-second bites as well. It's like it's constant onness, and also time has changed as well in a certain aspect.
Yeah. Good evening, Si. Good evening, Paul. Everyone's getting in there. Evening, Stephen. Thanks for joining us. Stephen asks, is it a flip phone? It's not a flip phone. In fact, it's funny now because flip phones are becoming cool again. Samsung has that Galaxy Fold, very stylish flip phone, far too expensive for what it is. But it's just a little, I think I got it from Harvey Norman. It was only like $50. It's a Vodafone phone. She already was on Vodafone. So I literally slide the SIM out, put it into the adapter, slide it in. Here you go, kid. Enjoy trying to find the letter fucking Z, wherever that is on the keyboard when you're trying to find it. And there we go. Right. Let's talk about stuff. Later on tonight, we've got Dr. Anna Brooks joining us via pre-recorded interview. And I saw a story this morning on the Herald. I actually woke up this morning. Maybe not woke up. I should see what time it is. Because if it was like at 11 o'clock, that would sound really lazy. I can't tell. I saw this morning this little thing that the Herald does, which is like a little 5-minute news commentary. And this conversation here, Luxon praised by commentators, we're actually going to get into that shortly. But I also saw this story about how the government's dealing with and kind of going, what do we do? What do we all do about long COVID? I want to play you a little bit of that story.
And there's no way of saying quite how much the aftermath of COVID is hurting New Zealand's economy. A report by the Australian government estimates around 31,000 people are calling in sick to work each day because of long COVID symptoms. It shows Australia lost 3 million working days in the first 6 months of 2022 to illness. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says New Zealand doesn't have this depth of analysis, but the Health Ministry is looking into long COVID research.
So New Zealand doesn't have the depth of analysis that Australia has. to do with long COVID, right? That's what he said. He also went on to say this.
Like everyone in the world, will be continuing to track this. It's obviously a very new situation, and I don't even think there's a diagnostic tool per se for it at the moment. And so therefore, for people who are experiencing it, it'll be, potentially challenging.
And the thought that jumped into my head when I saw that was, we all know probably New Zealand's foremost researcher into long COVID. And I was sparked by the sentence, it's a new, what did he say? I wrote it down. It's a new situation. Because long COVID has been around since 6 months after COVID. So when does a new situation, how long do we, in 10 years, is it still called a new situation? So I thought what I would do is see if we could grab Anna and have a chat with her about what the government is saying. Because it seems like the government is saying, sure, this long COVID, have you heard of this long COVID thing? Yeah, who knew? No one knew what this new thing that's come out. And we've been talking to Anna since day one, pretty much. So for, 6 months or so. And she has been in the lab studying, looking at, hammering about how long COVID is the next pandemic, basically. And so I thought, hang on, these two things aren't making sense. So we grabbed Anna. I had a chat with her earlier today, and I asked her all about what the government's saying now, because there seems to be some inconsistency in the messaging between the government and what's happening in the labs. So that's what that conversation's about. But look, speaking of that little news bulletin that you saw, let's start off talking about Christopher Luxon. And the reason I want to talk about Christopher Luxon is because, as I just showed you, and I think we're going to play a little bit of it as well, but you would have seen the highlighted text for that story. So this is the tweet I put out this morning, right? And the highlight, so this is a screenshot, right, a screen grab, and the highlighted text, the overlay says, Luxon praised by commentators today, praised by commentators, with a picture of Luxon and Sam Uffindel and the Wicked Witch of the West. I can't remember her name. And if you want to check what Luxon's being praised by all these commentators, we're actually going to go back to this item from the New Zealand Herald and have a bit of a listen to what they say is worthy of praise.
Christopher Luxon's being praised for the handling of one of his first major scandals as Nationals leader. Tauranga MP Sam Uffindel's being welcomed back to the party's caucus after an independent investigation found an event alleged to have happened while at uni didn't happen as described. Political commentator Ben Thomas thinks National voters will be largely impressed by Luxon's handling of the situation.
The key thing for Luxon and National voters will be that he got on top of it quickly, and he introduced the kind of process that you might as
Just quickly, is there some kind of joke to be made here about before and after, or before and after? I don't know what would be happening in these two people's lives, but maybe before and after a trip to the barber, something like that. I don't know.
CE dealing with an issue, not trying to take care of it in-house.
So it just made me think, and this is what I tweeted out this morning. The New Zealand Herald runs a narrative this morning that Christopher Luxon has been, quote, praised by commentators for his handling of the Sam Uffindel report and overall situation. Can anyone please point me to the plethora of commentators slapping Mr. Luxon's back, please? Now, I thought it was a pithy little tweet. And it's actually it's going and been going and been going and been going. And there are a lot of people who are kind of saying the same thing. And it just made me think, that's interesting. What's going on here? So we thought we better have a little bit of a look at that tonight. And one of the, actually, let me just say one other thing. One of the constant themes coming through of the people responding were people talking about places. When I asked the question, who can you point me towards these commentators? A lot of people were saying things like probably just News Talk ZB AM crews, saying things like, it'll be Hoskings, here we go. I assume the commentators are Hosking, Soper, Heather Duplessis-Allen, etc., etc., etc. And so we've done a bit of a looking around tonight, and I guess, George, that's where I throw it over to you to see what has been happening in that world, and where are these commentators because we had strangely enough, a bit of a different take last night on Luxon's handling of this, especially the idea of the non-transparency from the man claiming the government always has to be transparent. So we had a bit of a different take. This take seemed to be different to ours. We didn't think that it required a lot of backslapping. But George,
I
you had a
guess-
bit of a look around.
Yeah, and quickly, I guess, like, we probably would have even said something similar to Ben Thomas, maybe a bit more sort of nuanced in terms of, I mean, that was just a tiny little bit that they would have got from a phone call from him, but we were talking about, you know, the sort of perspective that voters might have in terms of just seeing this story in passing and that kind of thing. And, you know, as some of our people in chat have said that, you know, Ben Thomas has done PR for these people, these ghouls before. But, you know, he's usually sort of fairly onto it sort of guy. But, I mean, that's largely where the headline for NZ Herald came from. When it comes to sort of, I guess, the comments that your tweet got in terms of News Talk ZB, you'd be surprised to hear that Mike Hosking critiques Luxon for his decision, as you'll see here.
Uffindel's back. Both scandals are behind us, and the lessons learned, I think, are as follows. Uffindel is blameless to the extent the King stuff he told the party about. The party, due to their ineptness, never quite got around to telling Chris Luxon. That's on the party, not Luxon or Uffindel. The other
Let's just pause there for a sec, because when people do say that, I'm going to keep saying, as long as he told them he attacked a junior with the leg of a bed. We said this last night. If Uffindel said, I was a bit of a bully at school. Oh, that's not good, but you're not a bully anymore? Yeah, no, I was a bit of a bully at school. If Uffindel said to the people, oh, and by the way, a group of us stood around a junior with legs from beds and beat that junior with them, I highly doubt he was, shall we say, he divulged everything fully. If he did, that's terrifying, which makes me tend to lean towards he didn't divulge fully what actually went on. To call yourself a bully is one thing. To say, by the way, you know, not saying this is Uffindel, but, you know, by the way, I cracked people's skulls in the playground is something altogether different. So it depends. The devil is in the detail, is what I'm saying. So yes, he told the party he was a bully, but the devil is in the detail. So when Hosking says he's blameless, only if he was 100% transparent, of which I doubt, because when he was challenged about the legs of the bed, he said, I can't remember. So I'm not going to be quite as, I was going to say fair, as nice as Mr. Hosking and say he's blameless, because I don't think he gave all the information about the level of bullying, it would appear. Sorry, George.
At the least, and if I had a criticism, it's of Luxon, who ran the line about having a daughter at university. I got a daughter at university, but I would have needed more than he had to hire lawyers. It was a little bit between a rock and a hard place. I get that. By doing what he did, he silenced everyone successfully. But if we go around standing people down or hiring KCs at the drop of an allegation, that's why lawyers get rich, of course. I would have taken Sam's word, and the complainant, who hadn't been heard from for well over 2 decades, would needed to have stumped up with something a bit more than they did, which was little more than ringing a radio station, for goodness sake. The big lesson, of course, is who can be bothered with crap like this, eh? At 16, a lot of us did dumb things. Most of us grow up, move on, and want to be better people. If we want quality in public service,
boys will be boys.
Yeah. The drop of a hat or the hint of a scandal.
The Mike Hosking Breakfast.
Yeah, it's interesting that his criticism is Luxon shouldn't have investigated. Basically, that's Hosking's criticism. That
he should have just gone balls to the wall, like, nah, it's all good. Pretty much. There's not enough story there or something like that.
I mean, we've talked, I've talked in the last couple of days about leadership to do with one of my Mayoralty conversations here in Dunedin. And I don't think Hosking's in any kind of position of power when it comes to staff. He's not a boss. He's obviously got people working around him. But if a boss had that attitude, like if someone who had staff under him had an attitude, I'd be like, dude, it's going to be a pretty toxic work environment, you know, just get over it and get on with it. And I don't care about your accusations, you know, prove it to me, victim. You know, that sounds like a pretty, again, I'm not saying this would be the environment around Hosking, because he's not the boss of ZB. He's just a staff member. But if that was the attitude of a boss or someone in a position of power, man, that would be a pretty awful place to work or people to be involved with.
Mm. Well, and you know, and I know it's tiresome to point out hypocrisy in politics, but you know that in the Mika Whaireti scandal and that sort of thing, Mike Hosking would have been going hard, and we need a bloody Queen's Commission or whatever the hell it's called into this, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, King's Council now, isn't it? Got to get used to that King's Council. That's going to be a strange one to get used to. Look, just on that as well, I always like to remember these moments, because what Hosking is saying is believe the MP, don't do an investigation. See if he says the same thing if a parallel conversation comes up with Labour. What did he say about Sharma? Did he say...
Yeah, well, he talks about Sharma at the start of this, actually. He makes the start of it about Sharma. Do you want to listen to that?
Sure, let's have a listen, because you have to be consistent, one would think, and say that Labour didn't do it and good on them for not doing it. That would be the consistent message. If he says anything other than that, then it's inconsistent.
9 weekdays on News Talk ZB.
G'day there. So as predicted in the Battle of Wayward MPs, as far as Uffindel is concerned, there is nothing to see here as regards Shermer versus Uffindel. National beats Labor. Labor dragged it out, had secret meetings that they pretended one didn't happen until two they did, and then they pretended they weren't secret at all, and eventually sent him to the world of independence, where he currently sits so far with no more smoke guns or firepower by way of allegations. Meantime,
okay, hang on. So he's saying that Luxon should not have investigated this. So he's criticising National for actually investigating, and he's criticising Labor for not investigating at the same time. Can anyone else see that? He's saying the way Labor did it was wrong when they didn't investigate and they took the word of their MPs, and the way that National did it was wrong when they did investigate because they didn't take the word of the MP. What? Anyway.
News on day one. How a lawyer was ever going to go back to flatting days at university and piece together anything that stood up in 2022 was beyond me, and so it has proved to be. Differing stories, clearly a lot of heat and hate.
So hang on, again. So what is he saying? That if a historic, and this is not with Uffindel, but if a historic crime has happened, there's no way they can figure it out. Well, that was 20 years ago. Sorry, dude. Yeah, it doesn't matter what happened. There's no way we can figure out whether an event happened 20 years ago. What are you talking about? I heard someone today talking about how amazing it is that we have a written history of where Julius Caesar lived, what he did, what he thought, who his family was. That's from over 2,000 years ago. And Hosking's going, it's 20 years ago. They can't prove anything. It's like, what? What are you fucking talking about? You fucking wicked witch of the West. Anyway.
Well, in some ways he's right, because we don't know the details of the investigation, and well, by all accounts, they talked to a bunch of mates of Uffindale's at the direction of people chosen by Luxon to be interviewed for the investigation. So he's sort of right in that it's fucking useless.
Well, I mean, but he didn't say it's fucking useless. He was basically saying you couldn't do it anyway. He's basically saying like it's pointless because you're never going to find out. It's like, so if a murder was committed in 1998 that hasn't been solved, there's no way of solving it today. Of course there is. New facts come up. Of course you can go back 20 years. And this wasn't that. This was in the early 2000s, wasn't it? Like, can you remember what you were doing in the early 2000s? I can tell you a story about incidents that happened to me in the early 2000s. You might not have been. Were you born in the early 2000s? Yeah, you were born. I'm kidding. I'm joking. Young buck, you. Anyway, that seems peculiar to me. Well, it doesn't seem peculiar to me, but it seems typical. Any chance to slam Labour and kind of give National a pass. It's just ironic that it does it in the space of two sentences, kind of saying the opposing thing. Weirdo. Anyway.
Yeah. Any other comment? We're talking about commentators praising Luxon, or the other sort of opinion and comment is basically that it's impossible to, as Joe Moyer puts it in the newsroom, it's almost impossible to form a view on whether National leader Christopher Luxon made the right call reinstating Uffindel, because we know fuck all.
Yeah, well, that's the point. We don't have the information. We don't have the data. We don't know what the report was about. We don't know who they interviewed. We don't know what was said in the report. And as we said last night very clearly, if they're going to give up that arrow of being able to say to the government, you need to be more transparent by not being transparent themselves, then obviously, well, I say obviously, I guess it's an opinion. To me, it means that there was something bad enough in the report that they'd rather lose that arrow than give to the public the findings of the report.
Yeah, hence they can only get commentators like Ben Thomas talking about the optics of it, right? Because the material of it is non-existent. Commentators, us as commentators, have to comment on a known unknown, a sort of black hole, because fuck all is being released.
Very, very true. Dun, 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 dun. Adam T. So Silfo, full of crap. He could be the next national leader. Free Soul thinks we've got another Karen Hoskins on our hands.
I liked this one. Heads up, I win. Tails up, you lose.
Yeah, and it's
With
just
the Hosking thing.
It is weird, isn't it? I mean, I guess probably I was the first time I'd heard it, so maybe I'm being a little bit too sort of black and white where there's a bit more nuance. But if he's criticizing one side who don't investigate, and he's criticizing them criticizing them who don't investigate, and then his criticism of the other ones is you shouldn't have investigated. It's a bizarre situation.
I think your problem is arising from you holding him to a higher standard than he needs to be held to.
What, me wanting to be consistent?
Yeah,
is that the problem?
Yeah.
Sheesh, I know these bloody mouthpiece of radio stations and internet broadcasts trying to be consistent. Oh yeah. All right, guys. Anything else? You got any other clips or anything to show there, George? Or should we move on to the next one?
No, that's good. That's good.
Really sad story that's been playing out for a few months. Everybody knows the story now, and that's the Dunedin man, Rory Nairn. The coroner has confirmed today that the death was due to the COVID-19 vaccine. Rory Nairn's cause of death was vaccine-induced myocarditis, the coroner has concluded. Nairn, 26, died on November 17, 12 days after receiving his first dose of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. His death led to a coronial inquest. Coroner Sue Johnson interviewed several people to establish Nairn's health at the time of death and to rule out any other underlying cause. On Tuesday, the coroner's findings were able to be released to the public. Her findings included a report by pathologist Dr. Nolan Hyung, I'm going to say, who said determining the cause of myocarditis was a diagnosis of exclusion because there was no test which could find the presence of the vaccine in the myocardial tissue. So I'm assuming that means a diagnosis of exclusion, meaning it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not this. So it must be the things that are left over. So if you can't say it is this, I would assume that a diagnosis of exclusion is removing reasons and then seeing what you're left with. Hyung took many samples to rule out other causes. The disease was a rare side effect of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine, but could also be caused by other conditions such as rheumatoid fever or infections. According to the latest MedSafe safety report dated August 31, 3 deaths were likely due to Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine-induced myocarditis, with 2 awaiting the coroner's determination. 8 other cases were still under investigation. The coroner's inquiry was ongoing. Still to be determined were the circumstances of Nairn's death, if it could have been prevented, and if any recommendations were required to prevent further deaths. Nairn was vaccinated on November 5th at a pharmacy which has interim name suppression. On the first day of the coronal inquest held at the High Courtroom in Dunedin on August 30, the court heard that Nairn was initially vaccine hesitant, which is actually part of the most tragic part of the story. Didn't really want to get it. But according to his fiancée, Ashley Wilson, Nairn decided to get vaccinated so their wedding, planned for March, would not face additional gathering limits. Nairn was not told of myocarditis or its symptoms when he was vaccinated. The evening of November 5th, Wilson said Nairn experienced heart flutters. Because it wasn't painful, he did not seek medical assistance. He also thought it could be due to stress, as he and Wilson had just bought a home they were renovating. Nairn, a plumber, was in good health. It wasn't until the night of November 16 he began to experience the fluttering again, and his symptoms worsened. By the early hours of November 17, Nairn, who couldn't sleep, agreed to go to the emergency department with Wilson. Before leaving, he went to the bathroom and collapsed. According to the coroner's findings, it was 4 a.m. when Wilson found him there unresponsive and called an ambulance. At 4:30, his death was verified. Tragic, horrible, just who can imagine? And like we've said all the way through, our experiences, our life experience kind of, they shape what our thoughts are. And, for Ashley Wilson, the partner of Rory Nairn, if she's someone who was anti getting the vaccine and rallying against it and stuff. I'm just like, you absolutely, you do what you need to do, you go. Because the reality for her, and now it's sort of official, is 100% of her fiancés died due to complications from the vaccine. So it's just an awful, and it's a horrible, and it's a tragic story. It is a story, though, that a lot of people are using to demonstrate data which is not there. And so I don't want to come across as cold-hearted or sort of not thinking about the individual story. But as I always say, a story and a story in and of itself, like your lived experience, is also known as anecdotal evidence a lot of the time. And as horrible and tragic and horrific as that story is, when you have a look at what's happening in New Zealand with the COVID vaccine, there have been close to 12 million doses put out there. It's it goes to show, as hard as it is, and cold-hearted, and I get it, man, as cold-hearted as it sounds to say, that whatever that percentage is, 99.9 percentage to the 10th digit, it's safe, and for some people it's not, which is horrific. And the saddest thing of the whole thing is, I've read two different accounts actually. One was saying that MedSafe has said he did get told about myocarditis beforehand, and one's that said he didn't. This is one of those situations where it appears to be human error. Like, this is actually, I should be careful, shouldn't I, that there's no legal repercussions here. From what I'm reading, it seems that if he wasn't given the information, which is what most reports are saying, then he should have been given the information, which appears to be a communication error done by humans. Does that mean human error? I guess so. And it's one of the situations
that the coroner said.
Yeah, okay. If it's one of the situations where that is the case, it's one of the times where I kind of go, this is where you look to America and you look at their litigious world and their idea of suing. Because if that is the case, then I know that money is not worth human lives, but it's the kind of case where ACC will have a $10,000 payout for this poor family and stuff, and they deserve so much more if this can be absolutely pointed to human error of not passing on information. So, yeah, it's horrific. I also actually, do you want to jump onto that, George, before I go to my last little thought about this?
Oh no, it's just, I mean, I knew Rory when he was a kid, so it's sort of extra just horrible, like especially because of the rarity of it happening as well, the novelty of the death, especially because, as you said, their thoughts on the vaccine is before he took it and that sort of stuff. Yeah. It's not much more I can add. It's just sad.
I mean, that's it's not the worst thing. The worst thing is someone passing away. But can you imagine, like, I don't know if you're probably too young to have these thoughts, George, but I'm getting to an age now where, I've got friends and stuff who get things like get cancer early. I know someone who passed away in their early 40s with cancer, and, it's the kind of thing that happens as you get older, a bit older. But I think after these stories came out, when people were getting boosters and stuff, everyone kind of goes, I know statistically this is incredibly safe, but there are stories, one person gets the cancer and the other 999,000 don't. Not to say this is a good thing, obviously, but one person wins lotto and the other 5 million of us don't. There's those instances where the one person becomes the 100%, because it's 100% of them that whatever the event is happens to. And it's just for someone who actually didn't really want to get it to be the one person, that to me feels even more tragic and sadder, because I don't know if we've got an internal thing that tells us about our body. Like, I remember, and this is not medical advice, I've said this before, when we had children getting their first vaccines, our midwife told us very clearly, for children, for those vaccines, her experience, again, not medical advice, was you normally get a free hit with kids' vaccines, and you'll see in that first vaccine if they're going to react, and if they're going to react, they typically react to the second vaccine. Not medical advice, don't take it as medical advice, just something we were told, and that was something that helped us go forward. But our midwife was saying that vaccines can affect some people in really bad ways, and this was the children's one. And so one of the things I also wanted to look at was what is, and it's actually quite hard to find information about how vaccines negatively impact people, especially when it comes to death. Because if you look it up now, all you get is flooded with COVID. And this is from singlecare.com. It's difficult to precisely know how many people have died directly due to vaccinations. Many studies report death rates for vaccines like smallpox to be around 1 death for every 1 million people vaccinated. From 2000 to 2015, 104 deaths were reported in some way attributed to the measles vaccine. However, the reporting system is unable to establish a confirmed causal relationship between the vaccination and subsequent death. And this is the horrible thing, you know, like for people who have it's happened to, it's 100% of that person. It's horrible. But I mean, I knew when I had kids that it was a risk for the kids to get them vaccinated, and that for one kid in 1 million people, 100,000 people, or whatever, it's going to be detrimental. For 1 in 1 million, it might cause death. But I guess those are the risks we do that we choose to take. And again, acknowledging, as cold-hearted as it sounds, talking about someone's death, I just think it's important because there's a side of this conversation using Rory's death to further an agenda of unsafeness around the vaccine. But I think the reality, the uncomfortable and probably inappropriate reality to be talking about now, is that there are 3 deaths, and there are, I read it before, I think it was 3 with 2 more. So there's 13, even if all 13 were, well, that is 1 in 1 million. That's nearly 12 million. And it's not saying all 13 are going to be deaths. It says 3 at the moment. But if all 13 were and there was 12 million things, that's close to 1 in 1 million, which is horrible. I mean, don't get us wrong. It's horrible, but it's important to tell the full story, trying to be as empathetic as possible to the individual story. So the individual story I don't want to touch, and I just want to say publicly, we're so sorry for your loss, and it's a horrible situation. But as people who talk about news, we also want to give the full account of what's going on as well. So I don't think I need to add any much more to that, because I don't want to keep on talking and make it seem like that we're trying to do more. But that's it. We want to give the whole story whilst being empathetic to the individual story. I think that's what we're trying to say as well. So yeah, hearts go out to Rory Nairn's fiance and anyone else who that has happened to, or who has had and I'm saying this not being facetious, but an actual vaccine injury, because there is lots of reports of people claiming them that hasn't been the case, but actual ones. So yeah. Anyway, what else, George? Anything else on for tonight for you?
Yeah. No, I've been watching the Game of Thrones show, the new
one.
Yeah.
Any good?
Yeah. I mean, I like it. I've not really got any shows on the go at the moment, so I've been watching that. That's about it.
I just started watching. She-Hulk Attorney at Law.
Oh yeah.
And I was basically sitting with my tonsillectomy 13-year-old, trying to find something that we both might want to watch. And I've watched the first episode, and it's actually quite good. I was actually surprised. I was going to be like, I hate it, this is stupid, but it's much more cartoonish, and it's much more comic bookish. It's sillier, and I think it's supposed to be sillier. So if you go into it not looking for Avengers Endgame, but maybe looking for 1980s or 1990s Spider-Man does whatever, you know, that electric company Spider-Man. If you go into it thinking like that and expecting something like that, it's okay. I enjoyed the first episode enough to want to watch the second episode. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, I'm going to believe you, but I don't really do the whole Avengers thing. So I'll just have to take your word for it and never watch it.
Yeah, it's surprising. If anyone's watched it in the chat, She-Hulk Attorney at Law, tell me what you think. Mind you, if you've watched it, you probably liked it, and if you tried it, mind you could have tried it and given up on it and not liked it. But yeah, no, it was okay, George. It was worth watching the second episode for me, not for you, but for me. All right. Hey, thanks for being with us this week, George.
Sweet. No problem.
Been lovely to have you on board, because what we're going to do now is go and have a chat with Anna Brooks. So we will catch you. Oh, now you're away for a couple of weeks, aren't you? Really?
Yep. Sorry.
Something
you
like
cut
that?
out for a second there. Yep.
Sorry.
Yep. This is my last day for a couple of weeks.
All right, man.
Off
Well,
to Auckland, off on a road trip, doing heaps of shit.
What are you doing on the road trip?
Our destination is Auckland to see the World Rally Championship come to New Zealand.
Yep.
But we're going to chuck in some family that I don't really know. And speaking of chucking, we're going to throw my granddad's ashes somewhere in Wellington. Throw them, scatter them, I guess.
Scatter is probably technically correct.
It should be good. Going to do lots of driving, taking the ferry. So yeah, Christchurch to Auckland and back via Napier.
So flying up, driving back, or driving up, driving back.
I'm going to bus to Christchurch and then we're going to drive back.
Nice, bro. Have fun.
Lots of driving, yeah.
Yeah, be safe on the road, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thank you, George. Enjoy.
See you.
All right, and for the rest of us, we are going to hang here for a bit longer. As I said earlier, we have had a chance to have a conversation with Dr. Anna Brooks, specifically about the, wasn't it announcement? The commentary offered by Grant Robertson today around what the government needs to do, is doing, what's happening in Australia with long COVID. Of course, you and I have a very good friend by the name of Anna Brooks, and she's the one who taught us about magic here. Everyone knows this. And I think that it would be a good time to get her on board to talk about what the government talked about today with long COVID, because it kind of felt a little bit like the government was saying, Grant Robertson was saying, yeah, this long COVID thing, we don't really know too much about that. And there are people who know a lot about it, people in the country who know a lot about it. One of those people is Anna Brooks. Welcome to the show, good friend of the show, Dr. Anna Brooks. Anna, good afternoon, / evening to you.
Good evening, afternoon to you too.
You doing well? How's your day going?
Not too bad. Down here in Wellington after a COVID-free flight, COVID-free city. It's quite good being COVID-free.
So how were the masks on the flights, the people around you?
Non-existent.
Oh, really? Not a one?
No, there was a one or two. Like it was that bad. Like surprisingly bad. I sort of thought, it would be sort of peeling back, but it was fairly mask free. I was trying to gauge whether I sort of thought it was 95% mask free, 98%, 99%. So yeah, so we really are in a moved on society, I think.
I saw an email from a school in the last couple of days, and it was very casual and very light-hearted. It wasn't making a joke, but it was said in a less serious way. Oh, we've got a bit of a COVID cluster at the moment. I'm like, isn't that weird? Sort of a week out from when all these restrictions were less, that there's a bit of a COVID cluster all of a sudden in a school.
Yeah.
So, yes, it's weird. It's weird. It's strange. But listen, the reason I contacted you today, and thank you for giving us a few minutes during your conference time, is I saw I don't know if it's interesting, but certainly on New Zealand Herald this morning, they do like a short series of adverts, and news stories. They tell a news story and they do a news bulletin in like 5 minutes. And they were talking about long COVID, and I thought, I know someone who knows a bit about long COVID. So I watched it and I went, this sounds a bit familiar to me. So I thought, I'll get Anna, see what you've got to say about it, because it sounds like the government saying, gosh, who knew this long COVID thing? Who knew? No one's talked to us about this. So let me play the story first, and then I'd like to get your take on it.
And there's no way of saying quite how much the aftermath of COVID is hurting New Zealand's economy. A report by the Australian government estimates around 31,000 people are calling in sick to work each day because of long COVID symptoms. It shows Australia lost 3 million working days in the first 6 months of 2022 to illness. Finance Minister Grant Robertson says New Zealand doesn't have this depth of analysis, but the Health Ministry is looking into long COVID research.
Like everyone in the world, we'll be continuing to track this. It's obviously a very new situation, and I don't even think there's a diagnostic tool per se for it at the moment. And so therefore, for people who are experiencing it, it'll be, potentially challenging.
And those are the latest New Zealand.
So there you go. So what I read from that is that, there we go, is that Australia has been tracking long COVID. They've lost 3 million work days in the first 6 months of this year. 31,000 people, I think it's a day or a week, are phoning in with being sick. And the New Zealand government, via the finance minister, says we don't have the depth of analysis that Australia had. So in other words, they're saying, as far as I can see it, we can't comment on that because we don't know, because we haven't been doing the research like Australia has. And that's when I went, I know someone who's been doing some research around long COVID, Dr. Anna Brooks. So tell us what you're hearing, and tell us what we're missing, and tell us what the government has or hasn't done in the situation.
Well, yeah, a few things came through there, like that constant phrase of "it's all very new," we don't know much yet. It gets a bit tiresome to keep hearing. What is new? We've known since 2020 that long COVID was always going to be a problem, and it has been a problem here in New Zealand since 2020. So it is not something new. It is something that has been actively dismissed for a very long time. So that was the first thing. And then absolutely true, there is no diagnostic tools. Guess what my research is trying to uncover? A diagnostic tool.
All right.
That's exactly the focus of my research, is to unpack and understand, what is happening in the dysregulated immune system, essentially. Can we find a diagnostic marker so that we can help validate people who are going through this and all the rest of it? But guess what? Literally $0 has been invested in this country in biomedical long COVID research. Now, that's another massive emphasis that I want to get across here. Yes, the government have now invested, they released money, I think it was 9 million across, I think it was 23 projects that were variations on understanding the vaccine uptake and the COVID response. And all of these things are all very critical, not dismissing any of those aspects, but not one single project is dedicated to the biomedical understanding of this illness. So there's going to be projects that will uncover prevalence. All of these things are really, really necessary. So as I say, everything that was funded is necessary, but not one of those projects is biomedical research. And another aspect of that, it's not traditional for biomedical research to come out of a ministry, but the numbers that are floating around internationally for biomedical research in the space are huge. It was over $1 billion in the US and several millions in the UK, and we've had $0 in the biomedical research space to understand what's going on with long COVID.
So what I hear you saying, and from what Grant Robertson was saying there, I jotted down 3 lines. And one of the lines was, it's a new situation. You've already referenced that because it's not a new situation. No. Another line I jotted down was potentially challenging. Like it might be, it might not be, we'll see. And the third thing was the no diagnostic tools. What I hear you saying is you've been working on what could be a diagnostic tool, but the government hasn't really addressed or given funding or helped go through that process. So now they're at a point where they've gone, well, there's no but there could have been a diagnostic tool if someone within the structure of the bureaucracy had have decided to drive some money into the area you're working in. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's sort of a fair analysis of that, because like research by nature, we have to explore avenues to be able to come up with a diagnostic tool. And there's been a ton of research, like the amount of research publications already on long COVID is phenomenal. And so again, it comes back to sort of calling this a new situation. It's not a new situation at all. There's a ton of research that's coming through, but it's also always evolving as well. And the other thing that can be somewhat frustrating is sort of saying, oh, we've got to bring it back to the New Zealand situation because Omicron is new and we were all vaccinated. It's like, well, again, we're already hearing internationally that the biggest wave of long COVID is going to be from the Omicron. Our support networks exploded with people with long COVID. We already know this is happening here. And so yeah, some of these things become frustrating to continually hear that it's new, it's going to be a big problem, because we knew this all along. And so yes, it is also tough when you sort of are immersed in the research, well connected internationally about hearing what could be strong leads to develop diagnostics and things like that, and just not having resourcing to do so. Because, and in research, everything takes a long time, but do we have time? Do we want to be waiting? When you look at the international groups of the millions of people suffering with this condition, we don't have time. This is it, you know, and referring to Australia talking about lost work days and all the rest of it. You know, even getting infected and not getting long COVID, the lost productivity is huge just in that alone. And then that's not to mention all of those people that are sort of saying, you know what, I can't go back to work. I cannot function in this post-COVID state. And some of those people might have a long COVID type state for 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, a year, forever. That we don't know how many are going to go on to permanently not recover. And all we're sort of, the plea here is to escalate the demand in this space to get answers. We absolutely know that there are, you know, it's an organic biomedical or biological condition, and we need to sink resources into it so we can escalate and fast track diagnostic tests and treatments. And, you know, and we know that around the world that this is underway, and that's no excuse to sort of sit back and wait, if you like, when we could be helping New Zealanders here.
I just did some numbers while you were talking, and I did them based on a minimum wage type salary, which obviously not those 3 million lost days in Australia are not all minimum wage. But even if it was, that means the Australian economy has lost $500 million from people being off. So it doesn't seem to be a very long bow to go investing money into it, you know, to try and help that not be the situation. It's not very difficult to figure out how that can have a literal financial, let alone health payback as well. I was going to say, Anna, it's a kind of weird question to ask you, but would you be considered the foremost expert in long COVID research in New Zealand, or one of the foremost experts? Because it seems to be your area of research. Are other people quite delving into this as specifically as you are?
I don't know many others that are specifically diving into the biomedical side. We've got large networks of scientists, you know, interested in understanding the impacts of long COVID, you know, in a multidisciplinary way. But no, that we don't really have. I don't know of anyone else diving into the biomedical side. No,
because obviously, if you are indeed the foremost expert in New Zealand, or if no one else is going into the biomedical side, and that's where you need to go to find diagnostic tools, I'm wondering, of course, has the government talked to you? Have they reached out? Are they asking New Zealand's foremost expert what they should be doing to find this diagnostic tool? Have you had any interactions with them at all?
Not in that regard, no. You know, I guess the first step that has progressed is, as I say, funding some of these projects that are going to understand the scale. So, you know, documenting how many people have this condition. But you know, I guess another analogy, or, you know, another comparison is, you know, the warp speed that a vaccine was generated. And I think that's what a lot of people are saying in this space, is that, sure, you know, we all stops were pulled out, you know, to make sure that we got a vaccine as fast as possible. In fact, I lectured on it yesterday, and it was a matter of days. It was days before, you know, the vaccine project kicked off, you know, from days since the, you know, the sequence of the virus was made public. It was like, right, let's create a vaccine. And there's just been no urgency to say, right, let's you know, see what long COVID is, and let's stop this thing from happening. And when we're talking about investments, you know, like, you know, when we sort of try and document how much this is costing economies and things, we can't also forget that we're going to continually get long COVID, you know, because we have now got no protections in place, and the virus is going to continue to circulate. And we know that you might get one infection and be fine. You might get another one and be fine. It might be your third one that you get long COVID, or it might be your fifth infection that you get long COVID. The point is for as long as this virus is circulating, we will continue to get an increased burden of long COVID. So, you know, if we're going to accept that, because our government has accepted that and has told us that that's what we need to live with, if that is the case, then we need to be following up behind with tools to help people when they suddenly come down with this illness and cannot return to their work, their life, you know, function as they once did.
the finance minister, acting prime minister, telling us that we don't have the diagnostic tools to look at this, obviously referencing that Australia does. What do we need to do now? Are you saying they don't? Australia doesn't?
No, nobody has a diagnostic tool. What I think what he was referencing there was probably saying that you know, I don't actually know what their systems are over there, like whether there is state by state or a nationwide ability to track long COVID. I haven't seen any mention of that, but obviously they've done some numbers there, and probably that sounded like that came from sick days, right? So
Yeah.
people who are saying, hey, I'm off with COVID. So I don't know if that's that they're just surmising how many people have got long COVID, but there's certainly no diagnostic tools. What the way that you get diagnosed is what we call a clinical diagnosis. It's the same thing with ME/CFS, the other post-viral illness that, you know, many New Zealanders are already suffering with. These illnesses, because there's not a diagnostic test, you can't go and get a blood test and say, yes, you're suffering with this illness. What has to happen with ME/CFS is you have to be suffering for 6 months and have every other illness ruled out, and then that's when you're declared that you have this illness. With long COVID,
wow.
It's the official diagnosis can be from 3 months. So what has changed in recent times is that your GP can now diagnose you with long COVID because there is a coding system. And whether or not that's been successful, we don't necessarily have much feedback on it. It's been a mixed response in our support groups, whether people are managing to get that diagnosis or not. But essentially the tools are in place now to go to your GP and walk through your symptoms and, you know, and in some cases the epidemiology of your illness, because not everyone has validation that they were infected. All of those things, you know, make it cloudy, but there is absolutely no diagnostic test. And worse than that, your tests come back normal. So you could be so critically ill, and it's mind-blowing that every single test you could run comes back normal. And so that is what we really need to work on, and that's what we're sort of trying to educate and make sure that the doctor's response is not, therefore there's nothing wrong. So our catchphrase is, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. It's just that we don't have the tools. We need to find the tools, and we need to do that quickly. So that's kind of where the space is. And we know that vascular damage is part of the picture. We know that a disrupted immune system is part of the picture. We just need to develop the tests that might pick this up. We're also, you know, one of the places that we're sort of heading down the road of is the fact that we wander around taking for granted that our immune system is constantly keeping our latent viruses that we all live with, that we don't even give a second thought to. You know, we all get Epstein-Barr virus, we get glandular fever in our teens. All of those things live in us permanently, nice, suppressed away, not causing any problems mostly. And one of the hypotheses behind long COVID is that maybe the SARS-CoV-2 infection wakes these viruses back up, and that's what's triggering a long-term illness. We know that there are links to this Epstein-Barr virus, or EBV, or the one that causes glandular fever. We know that there are links to ME/CFS, so chronic fatigue syndrome. We know that virus has been linked to that illness. So we're seeing some patterns emerging, but it's just incredibly difficult to get any traction because biomedical research is expensive, and we need resourcing to do this. And as I say, a ton of resourcing went into vaccine development, and it would just be wonderful if the same urgency was placed on preventing these potentially long-term illness for a lot of people.
Have you experienced as an academic, I'm going to use a weird word here, Anna, but you know, kind of the lab work thinking about we'll give you an answer in a year isn't as sexy as, you know, the virus, which we'll get into you now and save some lives. Is there anything to do with prioritizing what they think is more important today versus what I hear you saying about is going to be more important in the long run?
I think we can't hide behind the fact that on an international scale, the pandemic is now politicized. We can't deny that, right? So any government of any day, you know, around the world doesn't want a burden of, you know, what's going to come, you know, next term in a few years' time. So yeah, I think when you strip it back, it's not surprising that there's not a huge focus on the potential long-term harms of infections. But that doesn't mean that's a good thing, does it? It just means I think from my perspective, I just accept that that's politics. I think is all I can say to that.
Finally, as well, does that just mean now that we've got some things in place with GPs that what the finance minister was describing as, you know, an in-depth analysis, that now just comes with time? Like, now that the things are in place, it's going to take 6 months to get that data to be able to reference back to, and that's really all we got to do now is wait until the data rolls in.
Yeah, so and as I say, some of these projects that are funded will basically help reveal how many New Zealanders are impacted by this illness. But what I would argue is that we should be doing them concurrently, because, you know, everyone that reaches out to me with this illness, they don't just want to be a number on a page. They don't want to be, you know, just a diagnosis. They want to understand what's happening and, you know, try and get diagnosed, but also, you know, try and get better. And we can't, you know, it's really, really tough fielding emails constantly where people are saying, you know, and they'll list off, you know, a barrage of very debilitating symptoms, and there's not much we can say back. And that's really, really rough. And so that's why, you know, like, sometimes it's tough as an academic, where sometimes people sort of assume it's your job, or, you know, like some people might sort of say, oh, you know, it's tough if you haven't got funding, you know, like as if it's my loss, if you like. And it's kind of like, this isn't about me and saying, oh, great, you know, I'm leading a study. This is so not about that. And that's what's quite difficult to get across sometimes, that it's as if you feel like you're filling your own bank account trying to get money, when really what I'm trying to facilitate is the massive demand from sick people who want answers. And that sometimes is hard to communicate, because it often feels like you're trying to win your own lottery, like that people think you're trying to win your own lottery, and you're like, no, this is not about me wanting to do, you know, this isn't an excitement of research. This is, I want to facilitate people getting better.
Dr. Anna Brooks, Auckland University. Anna, thanks for joining us again today. We always appreciate having you on. You're giving us some minutes now and then to share this out there. If you could say one thing to the Prime Minister right now about, you know, what you need to see to help you get there, what would it be?
I would love to see more investment in the biomedical understanding of postviral illnesses. Now.
Done. Just like
now.
That. Anna, thanks for your time. Appreciate you.
No problem. Catch you later.
Alrighty, there you go, guys. We're all done for another episode of Big Hairy News, and a few comments that have been coming in over the hour. Sai says that Biden has declared the COVID pandemic over today. Really? I hadn't seen that. I'll look at that for tomorrow, but I wonder if anyone's told the virus that. Paul says, haven't seen She-Hulk, but Tiana Mazzolani is amazing in Orphan Black, where she convincingly plays a dozen or so clones. She is dope. Adam says of She-Hulk, it is one of the best ones when it comes to Disney Plus Marvel shows so far. There you go. Big raps from Adam. Of the myocarditis story, Free Soul says, when I had mine, we were all handed a sheet warning about myocarditis, RIP Rory. I think that part of the coroner's report stated that MedSafe started instructing it was supposed to be handed out. It's always hard for me to kind of get the sounds maybe a little bit wanky, but a kind of gist of what the average person knows, because we do this every day, literally every day. Then and I'm speaking to people like, you know, Susie Wiles and Anna Brooks and, you know, Michael Plank and David Welsh and Michael Baker and those people. It's like I heard of it, knew of it, of the whole myocarditis thing beforehand. So I don't know what you know what I mean by average person. I don't mean that we're above average. I mean that people who aren't in the weeds, the information they actually get. Free Soul also goes to say that it's so sad. No doubt anti-vaxxers will be crowing now and spinning it. Finally, just Liz says, hey, you're on Facebook now. Great. Yep, we've been on Facebook, I think, for a few weeks now. You can find us on BHN, Big Hairy News on Facebook, or we are actually on a couple of Dunedin News Facebook pages, including one called Need News as well. And just finally, just a comment for you, Stephen. But again, Pfizer also warned us that the vaccine could damage us. How come we never hear? How come this is never mentioned? I'm assuming that therefore you weren't watching when we did the whole story, then, Stephen, on Rory, because all the way through it, we were talking about the dangers that are out there from vaccines. And when I say dangers, I mean the incrementally small, when you're looking at the data dangers. I even talked about it, and you mustn't have been here. I talked about our midwife talking to us about, the potential issues when it comes to vaccinating kids. We brought up numbers about that thing. So yes, I can't speak to other media. We can sometimes speak about other media, but we haven't shied away from the idea that, like if you look up, for example, deaths by the smallpox vaccine versus lives saved by the smallpox vaccine, for anyone who gets impacted or injured or dies from the vaccine when it comes to smallpox, again, the empathy is it's 100% of that person, wherever that is in the world. But the data would say literally hundreds of thousands, or if not millions of lives have been saved by that vaccine as well. So it's a horrible thing to have to acknowledge that something we do and try to do to help ourselves and our community can end up damaging some of that community. And there's actually there's no good in this. There's no good way to actually talk about that other than to be incredibly empathetic and incredibly understanding of the friends and family of that person or those people, and be really generous and understand that if they want to go off, they can go off. I've told this story before. I knew a very elderly woman last night. I knew a very, very elderly woman once, very, very elderly. Like she lived until she was past 100. And she used to be incredibly offensive about Japanese people. And then when you hear the story that her husband in World War II was in a Japanese prisoner of war camp and came back a changed man, like went away as a certain person, came back a changed man, you give her a wide berth. While some of the things that she would say about the Japanese country and the Japanese people were pretty awful, when you hear that because of the war and because of what her husband experienced in a Japanese prisoner of war camp was the thing that actually shaped those opinions, and when someone's in their 90s as well, there's no point trying to debate that person. You just feel empathy for them and go, I understand you be you, boo. I can't join you in that feeling, but I can completely give you the space to have that feeling because you've been through something that I haven't been through. And then obviously not participate in that feeling. And for me, it feels the same about the vaccine. Anyway, all right, Nala, time for bed? Should we go to bed? I think so. All right. She agrees. It's time to go. Thanks for joining us again tonight, team. We will see you again tomorrow night from 10 p.m. for another edition of Big Hero News. I'm assuming Chewy's going to be along tomorrow night as well. Be well, be safe, and until we see you next time, hooroo, my friends.